All right, council members, thank you for providing me with this opportunity to share with you about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The presentation you're about to see is a compilation of research I've done over the past 10 months on this topic. I'm far from an expert, but I do believe these concepts are important to consider for our employees, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to work with you to chart a path forward as to what this may look like. So in this presentation, we'll first spend some time getting oriented and laying some groundwork for who and what we're talking about when we discuss DEI. Next, we'll explore why this is something that may be beneficial for the city and how it fits in with current city culture and priorities. And finally, we'll address what implementing these ideas looks like and discuss what next steps you as city council may want to take. So there are a few things to consider before we begin. Whenever DEI is discussed, it's important to first take a moment to acknowledge that each of us are bringing our own biases into the discussion. These aspects of yourself are going to shape how you view the discussion and what you bring to the table, both positive and negative. So in my case, I'm white, which makes me less familiar with the experiences others may have around racial bias. I'm also a woman, which means I'm much more familiar with the experiences of sexism. I'm in my 30s, and I'm also in the millennial generation, so certain events and experiences have shaped how I view and interpret the world, as do my personal beliefs and my personality. I also live in a particular body that comes with some things I do well and some things I don't do well. I'm relatively able-bodied, but I have physical difficulties, some chronic. So I'm bringing all of this with me into the discussion, and it impacts how I process and interpret information and how I assess priorities. You also have these different areas that shape who you are. So as we go through the rest of this material, be aware of these aspects of yourself and how they may impact how you perceive and interpret the information presented. What's your racial background? Gender? Age? What's been your experience living in your body? How have your beliefs, personality, and experiences shaped how you see the world? And how might someone else see it differently? So with that information in mind, let's take a moment to ensure we're talking about the same thing when we talk about DEI. So DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Despite the common use of these terms, not everyone has a firm grasp of what they mean. So first of all, diversity is a passive word used to describe a group of people in which the individuals who make up the group have characteristics that are different from each other. Only groups can be diverse. Saying an individual is diverse would be an incorrect use of the term. For example, this picture shows a group of people who are diverse in some ways, race, gender, probably religion, but possibly not diverse in other ways, like age. Equity involves action. Equity is about changing processes, programs, laws, etc., so that the outcomes are fair for all individuals. It's important to note that equity is not the same as equality. Equality means giving everyone the same thing, whereas equity is focused on the outcomes. So for example, equality would say, let's give everyone the same thing, a bicycle. Equity would say, let's give everyone exactly what they need to accomplish getting from point A to point B. Or to use another example, let's say these kids can't see over the fence. Equality would say, let's give everyone a box. Equity would say, let's give them the boxes in the correct sizes so they can actually see over the fence. The third term in our trio is inclusion, which describes the culture and expectations that exist within a group of people. A culture of inclusions means that leadership is fostering a societal norm of welcome and belonging for each individual in the organization. The concept of inclusion goes beyond the absence of things like discrimination and harassment to the addition of feeling welcomed, valued, and comfortable while at work, just as you are. You might expect that DEI is something like a to-do list, first diversity, then equity, then inclusion, but that's actually not the case. We need to start at the end of the list with inclusion. The reason for this is that if you have a diverse population but don't have the culture and expectations to make everyone feel welcome and safe, that population is not going to stay diverse. Individuals who feel unwelcome are going to leave. You cannot have a sustainably diverse group if it's not also an inclusive group. Remember, inclusion is a descriptive word used to describe a culture, while equity is an action word. Equity can be used as a tool to support diversity and inclusion. For instance, if an employer provides a lactation room for employees, this is an act of equity that will both encourage women who are mothers to be in the workplace, which supports diversity, and makes them feel welcomed and valued, which supports inclusion. Diversity should be a natural result of efforts in inclusion and equity. Any strategy that simply pursues diversity without building on the foundation of the other two is setting itself up for failure. As stated earlier, people from marginalized communities are not going to stay in an employer where they feel unwelcome. Speaking of people from marginalized communities, let's talk about exactly which populations we're referencing when we talk about work around DEI. There tends to be a lot of focus on race, which is definitely relevant, but DEI certainly extends beyond race. DEI efforts aim to amplify historically underrepresented, marginalized, or underestimated communities of people. Or to put it another way, DEI aims to amplify the voices of minority populations or those who have less power in society. Who this is can vary based on your culture and where you live in the world. In the US, this means women, people of color, essentially anyone who'd be categorized as something other than white or Caucasian, sexual minorities such as LGBTQ+, religious minorities such as Muslim, people in low socioeconomic brackets, neurodiverse individuals, meaning people who have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, a stutter, and disabled individuals, whether it's a physical disability, mental disability, or genetic disorder. So as you can see, taking these different populations together is a huge group of people. So before continuing, I just want to pause and see if there are any questions about the definitions of DEI or what population it aims to elevate. Everyone following?
Tracking.
All right, so why are we talking about DEI? What exactly is the problem we're trying to address? So over the last few years, many organizations have shifted their focus to include addressing issues of racism in their organizational goals. In most cases, this is a response to the racial protests of 2020. It's become common for organizations to be in this reactive phase, often acknowledging that there is a problem in society and they want to do something about it. However, it's been less clear and harder to define exactly what the problem is, especially as it extends beyond simply issues of race. If we don't know what the problem is, you can't really know the best way to solve it. So to help us get on the right track, I'll briefly touch on what the overarching problem is and then explain how it affects workplaces and what we as a workplace can do about it. At its most basic level, and for a variety of reasons, our society was built for able-bodied, white, rich, heterosexual men. So if you happen to be someone who ticks all those boxes, societal expectations are probably working well for you. I've heard this described as playing a video game on the easiest level. One simple example of this is seatbelts, which were designed in 1962 solely to fit men. As of 2021, there is still no data as to how seatbelts work with a woman's body. This is even further complicated if you're a pregnant woman, 62% of whom do not fit current seatbelt designs. Tragically, car crashes are also the leading cause of fetal death in maternal trauma. This is one small example, seatbelts, of a way that society is constructed with a particular type of person in mind and how this places individuals who do not fit that mold at a significant, even lethal, disadvantage. Did the original seatbelt developers intentionally create a safety device that would be insufficient to protect women and children? It's much more likely that they were entrenched in a society that was designed for a particular type of person, and it didn't occur to them to consider how their design might impact someone different. So DEI is all about bridging this natural inclination for how we've been raised to view what the default person is to acknowledging the reality of our differences. It's not difficult to imagine how these disparities could start to creep into the work environment. For instance, let's say someone is an immigrant from Central America who doesn't speak English well, or perhaps they have sickle cell disease, or they simply don't have the generational wealth to help them purchase things like their first car or college tuition. So these people have to do something extra or work a little harder to meet societal expectations. Our hypothetical immigrant may be more intelligent and well qualified than his white counterpart for an open position, but he'd be passed over due to language barriers or implicit bias or lack of understanding of their new cultural setting. An individual with sickle cell disease may find themselves shut out of their desired profession due to the employer's inability to make accommodations for the disability. Or a young adult from a lower socioeconomic status may not do as well in college as someone coming from a wealthier background due to the necessity of spending time working to pay for their car and tuition instead of enjoying ample time for studying. So the farther an individual is from the archetype of an able-bodied, rich, white, heterosexual man, the more obstacles they have in their way throughout their life. Or to refer back to an earlier example, the more boxes they need to see over the fence. Beyond anecdotal examples, there's ample data to further illustrate how this disparity can affect the workplace. First, risk of lawsuits. In 2020, there were over 67,000 charges of workplace discrimination filed with the EEOC. Discrimination regarding race made up 32% of all claims, and sex was 31%. Reputation. There are cultural expectations around how diversity will be handled and promoted in organizations. And if your organization isn't meeting those expectations, it will hurt your reputation. Productivity and innovation. There is evidence that companies with less diversity are also less productive and less likely to develop innovative products. Employee retention and employee mental health. This is related to the experience of employees in the workplace. Is the culture of inclusion healthy enough that they're going to stick around? Is the environment causing stress that will negatively affect mental health and lead to increased health costs or costs associated with employee absences? And revenue. This is likely not as applicable to government entities, but it's worth noting that another place this impacts companies is revenue. According to a McKinsey report, companies in the bottom quartile for gender, culture, and ethnic diversity are 29% less likely to achieve above average profitability. So in other words, if you're meeting the status quo with diversity, you're also meeting the status quo with revenue. So what's the solution? Obviously, we will only focus on the workplace solution because societal solutions are far beyond the scope of this presentation. So DEI strategies offer an avenue to address the disparity between who society is built for and who is living in it by focusing on the underlying causes that perpetuate this disconnect. Specifically, organizations make a commitment to promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. People like being around people who are like them. It makes them feel safe, and it's how our society's been built. But when we design systems and programs for a specific type of person, we unintentionally make it more difficult for the huge number of talented people who don't fit into those categories to participate. This is our natural inclination, and if we want to combat this, we have to make an intentional effort that invades all areas of our organization. So unsurprisingly, the improvements with DEI strategies come in almost exactly the same areas that we observed problems. Risk of lawsuits. Cultivating a culture of inclusion naturally counters a culture of discrimination and harassment, which should lower the risk of lawsuits in these areas. There's no current data on this, but it makes logical sense. Reputation. Nowadays, and especially in recent years, DEI efforts are a baseline expectation for companies and for governments. For example, citizens may ask if a city's employees are reflective of the demographic makeup of its citizens. Answers to questions like this can impact how citizens view the city of Port Orchard. Productivity. Waterloo University in Canada found that a 1% increase in diversity led to a 0.5% increase in productivity. Innovation. A study in the UK found that businesses run by culturally diverse leadership were more likely to develop new products. And a study in Spain found that companies with more women were more likely to introduce radical new innovations into the market. I want to provide one quick aside about innovation and why diversity can increase innovation. So let's say you have a bottle of ketchup at home. Where do you keep it? Some people keep it in the fridge, others keep it in the cupboard. Now, if you're making a hamburger one day and you go to grab your ketchup and find that you've run out of ketchup, what are you going to use instead? If you keep your ketchup in the cupboard, you'll probably choose something nearby, like vinegar or oil. But if you keep it in the fridge, you might choose mustard or salad dressing. So your creativity is leading to very different dishes based on this one simple difference between two people. Accuracy. This is an interesting improvement. Scientists have found that employees working in diverse teams are 58% more likely than employees in homogeneous groups to perform tasks accurately. In this case example, the task was pricing stocks. The reason for this is that diverse teams are thought to be more likely to re-examine facts and remain objective. Employee satisfaction. Feeling welcomed and valued at work can reduce stress on your employees, improve mental health, promote employee engagement, and increase longevity at the organization. Keeping employees working, healthy, and happy also means lowered costs. And revenue. Again, this may not be as applicable to government entities, but there is a significant amount of research that shows increases in diversity align with increases in revenue. In Canada, the same Waterloo study I mentioned earlier found that a 1% increase in diversity led to a 2.4% increase in revenue. A McKinsey report found that worldwide, companies with the most ethnically and culturally diverse boards were 43% more likely to also experience higher profits. And Harvard Business Review found that diverse companies are 45% more likely to report increased market share year over year. And before we move on, do you have any questions on the topics I just covered? Okay. So how would DEI fit here at City of Port Orchard? What's the precedent for this, and how does it align with our current culture and priorities? So first, let's take a look at City of Port Orchard's current mission, vision, and values. This is a relevant excerpt from the much longer mission in Resolution 1838 from the year 1998. The City of Port Orchard will, within the general context of adopted plans, provide for the maintenance, preservation, and improvement of a wholesome city in which the citizens will enjoy living and raising families, recognizing the need for economic well-being and security. So you may say, there's nothing about DEI in here, and you would be correct. But if you imagine yourself as someone different than who you are today, perhaps another race, gender, or socioeconomic status, or perhaps someone disabled or a different age group, and read some of those phrases again. Is the City of Port Orchard a wholesome city for you? Do you feel safe and welcome to enjoy living and raising your family? Do you have access to economic well-being and security? This is what the heart of DEI is about, taking the time to make sure those systems and programs you have the privilege of imagining and fostering are taking into account people from all walks of life. This is an excerpt from Resolution number 1608 from the year 1992. Reaffirm and demonstrate a tolerance of new ideas and celebrate the City of Port Orchard's varied cultural and ethnic diversity. This excerpt is supportive of racial diversity, which demonstrates that the city has goals in this area. Remember, this is a vision for the city, so it's describing the direction the city wants to move. To my knowledge, the city does not have established values, but we do have 4 guiding principles that we read tonight, and I've taken some interpretive liberty with them. Raising the bar expresses a value of improvement. Honoring the past expresses a value of history, while not living in the past points to progress. Building connections with outside partners expresses cooperation as a value of the city. And I would argue that the decision-making process positively impacting diversity, equity, and inclusion is really expressing a value of inclusion because it's focused on bringing people to the table and into the decision-making process who have a vested interest in DE&I. Cooperation, progress, and improvement are also excellent supports of DEI efforts. The mayor has spoken out boldly to Port Orchard citizens regarding City of Port Orchard's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. His statements are the clearest commitment to DEI that I've found in city documents. His statements are specifically related to racism, which, as we previously discussed, is just one part of the population DEI aims to serve. Nevertheless, his support and commitment will be a huge foundational asset to DEI at the city. In 2020, the mayor released an extensive statement after the murder of George Floyd, expressing his solidarity with Black Americans. When it comes to ensuring Port Orchard is a safe and respectful community, we all must participate. I encourage all to speak, and I commit to listening and engaging in long overdue dialogue. A year later, the mayor released another statement affirming that racism will not be tolerated at Port Orchard. The City Council, our management team, and I all take seriously the responsibility to foster anti-racism and directly address racism and inequality in our policies and practices. Speaking of policies, you can also see some framework for DEI in our personnel policies. The equal employment opportunity, anti-harassment, anti-discrimination, and especially the open communications policy are all in line with DEI goals. What about culture and social norms? This is where we want the effects of DEI to show up, and it's also much more challenging to define and explain. I'm not going to attempt to define City of Port Orchard's workplace culture because I can only give my impression of it. But I am going to help you reflect on what you've seen, heard, or experienced in the workplace culture. These are some items that experts suggest thinking through when trying to assess your workplace culture. Leadership behavior. What actions does leadership take around DEI? Do they spend time and resources on it? Communication styles. What communication styles are acceptable at City of Port Orchard? Is it acceptable for employees to be aggressive or demeaning? Is discussing issues around DEI considered normal or taboo? Internal messages. What messages are sent internally regarding issues surrounding DEI? Is there an expectation of inclusion, or is there an us versus them societal norm? Celebrations. What is celebrated and recognized? We have Employee of the Quarter, and we have anniversary certificates. Are there DEI milestones that we recognize and celebrate? And finally, what are accepted and normal behaviors in the workplace? There's probably an infinite list of social norms, but here are just a few to consider. How much emotion can employees comfortably show? What degree of politeness and listening is expected? Are people respectful of others' personal space? Do employees participate in group activities? So let's say we can start to discern the need to intentionally pursue DEI at the city and maybe have some initial thoughts about areas that could benefit from this. But where do we start, and what would a DEI strategy look like? So unfortunately, there's no step-by-step manual telling us exactly what to do, and there's no one-size-fits-all program that we can implement. But many organizations are working on this, and there are resources available to help. I've been learning and talking with some of our neighbors about what has worked for them, so what I'm going to present to you is my synthesis of what I've learned. I've separated the information into 3 separate stages of DEI efforts that build on each other. Stage 1 is outlining a plan. At this stage, we define where we are as a city, where we want to go, and determine what steps we can take to get there. You may have started to realize this, but when you ask for DEI efforts, what you're really asking for is a cultural shift in the organization. DEI is not a program, it's a strategy. It's not something that one department or group of employees is responsible for implementing. It's something that every individual at the organization is responsible for, and it should be part of every department at the city. So this stage primarily serves our current employees as we're examining the current culture of the City of Port Orchard workplace. The first step is to establish internal workplace DEI as a priority from leadership. One way this can be accomplished is through a resolution from City Council. Once leadership has established this as a priority, the next step is to conduct an internal assessment and discover our workplace's current climate in the area of DEI. A consultant could be utilized for this, or we could create our own assessment based on available resources. Whichever avenue we choose, it's vital that leadership treat it as a priority so the response rate will be high enough to make the information useful. After we have this picture of where we are, we're ready to determine where we want to be. There is a temptation to set a goal of a particular racial makeup of city employees. It's tempting because it's a number that can be easily measured and it's visible. But despite the attractiveness of this idea, this is not something that we can accurately measure, and it also does not address the underlying issues that affect this number. In all my research, I heard the same consistent drumbeat that DEI is not about checking a box. It's about shifting a perspective and shifting a mindset. With that in mind, there are still a few benchmarks that can be utilized. For example, the Gartner Inclusion Index can be used to measure how inclusive an employer is using the 7 factors of fair treatment, integrating differences, decision-making, psychological safety, trust, belonging, and diversity. Finally, after we've outlined our current situation, set goals, and decided on measurements for success, we can plan what steps are needed to move us toward accomplishing those goals. An employee committee can be one helpful resource in meeting goals, but leadership will need to be mindful in establishing the committee's responsibilities and abilities. I suggest that the scope of the committee be limited to promoting inclusion, since promoting equity is beyond their authority or ability, and none of us can directly create more diversity. What a committee could do is support inclusion by providing periodic education, events, and activities for employees in support of the goals established by leadership. There are many questions to think through in determining appropriate action steps. Who will establish the city's DEI goals? Who will be responsible for verifying progress toward its success? Will employee participation in DEI-specific events be compulsory or incentivized? In all of these decisions, we aim to ensure we're setting ourselves up for success. After we've answered these questions and charted our path forward, we move to the next stage and begin to enact these steps. So this work is not only geared toward current employees, but also benefits future employees by improving the culture of their future workplace. This is the stage when the aforementioned committee would be formed. One possible title for the committee is the Inclusion Commission, because again, the committee does not have the ability to influence equity decisions or the degree of diversity of a population. In the promotion of an inclusive workplace, periodic education is vital, through presentations, webinars, workshops, etc. The committee can research appropriate topics and offer these periodically, perhaps on a rotating basis. Topics could include concepts like microaggressions and unconscious bias. Leadership, or possibly the committee, could also be responsible for administering benchmarks to track progress toward meeting established goals. And as the mayor said in his 2020 statement, the nature of DEI is such that every single person at the organization needs to be involved. In line with that point, this next task is something that the committee cannot assist with. It would be the responsibility of each manager and director to think through how DEI can impact their own sphere of influence. For example, HR can update job descriptions by auditing each one for things like unnecessary education requirements or an ability to lift 40 pounds that really isn't vital for the position. It also means checking job descriptions for hidden gendered language to ensure applicants don't self-select out. But this HR example is just one avenue that DEI could show up. Every employee will learn how to view the activities in their department through the lens of DEI and have tools for making positive changes. How will managers and directors be held accountable for this? One suggestion I've heard is adding DEI as a metric on their annual evaluations. Perhaps an overall goal of the city is related to manager and director scores in this metric. Lastly, we have stage 3, and this is outward focused, so I've termed it neighborhood outreach. I want to mention this arena, though I'm actually not suggesting that it be implemented at City of Port Orchard at this time, purely because I believe we have plenty of work to do in stages 1 and 2 first. Nevertheless, I'll briefly touch on these topics so you have an idea of where City of Port Orchard may move in years to come after robust workplace DEI goals have been accomplished. So this aspect of DEI is outward focused, away from the workplace and into the community, so it's oriented toward benefiting the people of Port Orchard. It can also help employees buy into DEI efforts because sometimes it's easier to see why these concepts are important when you can see real differences being made in people's lives. Furthermore, because we're a municipal government, changes to policies and procedures during stage 2 have the potential to also impact the greater community. For example, we frequently talk about how City of Port Orchard is growing, but what we may not be aware of is that as it grows, it's growing in a specific demographic of white Americans. In 2019, Port Orchard was 67% white, and in 2021, it was recorded as 73% white. It is exploring what policies and practices are supporting this demographic shift, something that the city wants to evaluate. If so, alterations in this area could have an effect on City of Port Orchard citizens as a whole. During the course of my research, I have made connections with Kitsap County, KPHD, and Bremerton Housing Authority. This year, I will also be able to join a local group that meets bi-monthly to discuss DEI. Our jurisdictions are very eager to learn from one another, and these connections will be additionally valuable if we can pool resources to serve the local community. Time could also be spent identifying marginalized communities and easing their access to interacting with municipal government. For instance, perhaps an evening session to provide training on how certain government processes work, or providing applications and forms in languages other than English. There are certainly physical needs in the community, and we all know that unexpected events like tornadoes or pandemics exacerbate those needs. Perhaps the workplace could host collections, fundraisers, or gathering donations aimed specifically at benefiting marginalized communities. An annual Juneteenth event is hosted in Bremerton, and Port Orchard volunteers would be more than welcome to assist with it. Perhaps this tradition could be expanded to Port Orchard, and we could add in more events and celebrations in future years. Next slide. So the only question left is to consider whether you're ready to get started. As you can see in the staff report that accompanied this presentation, we've presented some possible next steps, including creating council resolution, directing the completion of employee assessment, or establishing leadership over DEI efforts in a committee. And thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation, and I believe there's time for discussion, and Debbie and I are happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
Or Clausen.
First off, I want to thank you. I've had the opportunity to see many presentations on this particular subject, and without a doubt, this one is the best, so thank you. And that goes not only local, but regional, state, and national. So you did a fantastic job. And I just want to compliment you on that, and I want to compliment you on kind of setting the path forward for us. Because it certainly is something that I think we're all agreed that it's an important issue that we need to get, I guess, just get going on. So I just wanted to thank you and compliment you.
Thank you.
I saw you almost raising your hand. Did you have a comment?
I want to say it was a very impressive presentation as well, and I really enjoyed it, and it's given us a lot to think, given me a lot to think about. DEI is casually thrown about, and so it's nice to hear some, some solid ideas and approaches, and a great presentation behind it.
It's the third time I've seen this presentation, and I'm impressed every time. So,
Yeah.
Elizabeth is a rising star at the City of Port Orchard. She's doing an exceptional job in human resources. So, Jay, I saw you raise your hand there.
I do. Unfortunately, for most of us at the City Council, we check some of the blocks off that we have to guard against, and I'm just being blunt about it. And having lived through a lot of changes, thank you for keeping to move the ball forward, so to speak. So it was a very excellent presentation. I think John hit the nail right on the head about how good it was. I don't know where we go from here. Mayor keeps pushing it forward, and I think that's a great thing along with it. I wonder how we get more diverse in our city and how we get more diverse in our government, in our recruiting methods, which we talk about a lot with Debbie and with the mayor. Those are all things to look at. One question I do have is, and I think you touched on it a little bit, is when we're trying to be more inclusive, we still have, for lack of better words, an end point to reach in our performance of our jobs. So I think you touched a little bit about it, about saying, do you have to move 50? Is that really realistic, or are there other tools? But the realization we still have to move X or do Y is still important in getting the right people in the right jobs.
Correct.
With everything else. But again, thank you. It was excellent and very thoughtful.
I think this is a journey, and internally we've been working on it for about 10 months. We sent Elizabeth as our representative to a countywide forum that she came back with energized and with ideas from, and Elizabeth touched on it. It starts with inclusion, and I think we talk about it from time to time here. We want to be an employer of choice, and that's an element of it. But there's much more work to be done in this realm. I think if you're receptive to it, I think it'd be very powerful for the city council to pass a resolution. And we've got some thoughts in that area. And then we've got work to do internally before we can take this externally, I think. Councilmember Shane?
I just want to echo what everyone said about it being a very nice and thought-provoking. I like that it was customized for Port Orchard. And the takeaway that I'm just thinking about, though, is that if I were to encapsulate what we need to do in a statement, I would say we need to reach the next generation, both in terms of council members and employees and just the population. And that would be, for me, the challenge, like, how do we do that? Often DEI presentations are so abstract. So I like that you gave some examples, and that made it more, I guess, approachable in a sense. So
Real. It was real.
yeah. Usually it's just so abstract, like you need 1% this to reflect your population, and I think we agree that that wouldn't necessarily, that's not the approach we want. But I do think, you know, it's something that you see everywhere you want. It's like everybody wants to see more younger people.
What are you saying here, Fred?
You're an exception, of course. So thank you.
Mayor, can I make one more comment?
Certainly.
And this is, I'll direct this to my fellow council members, this is just food for thought, not toward individual members, okay? I want to clarify that. After George Floyd, basically the riots went down and stuff, I had a conversation with somebody who I respected, not here on council, and the pushback was, and it was from a white male in late 60s, and it was, gee, how far we've come in 50 years. And my comment was, why the hell do we have to wait 50 years? And that would be my comment here today, is why do we have to wait? I know it's a process, and I know that some of the things the mayor's asking about, thoughtfulness, et cetera, but let's be on the cutting edge and not on the reactive edge. That would be my challenge to us. That's it.
And as I speak to it being a journey, Elizabeth is taking, or Beth is taking the lead on this. Her primary job, though, is to, fill all of our job openings. We have an HR department of 2. We're going to do work in this realm, and we're going to advance the ball here. But many organizations like Kitsap Public Health have a dedicated staff member, and I'm certain Kitsap County has a dedicated staff member to that. And we could move much faster, but it takes significant resources. And we're gonna do work in this realm. I think I'm gonna come back to that question. I think the first step is maybe we'll bring it to a work study is creating some policy that you guys support and pass, a resolution that empowers us to do more in that realm. Councilmember Lucarelli?
I want to also stress that I feel we have already been moving in the direction. I don't think we have to start. We're already moving in the direction, and I would say communication is as important as anything. When we're talking about inclusion, I think the atmosphere here at City Hall with the communication process that exists and what the mayor has been working toward and the council is already moving in a direction of inclusion. And I actually, you just said it wasn't just race, it wasn't just this. And I think that that has been very important, a change. If you just go back several years, here at City Hall, the atmosphere is so different. We have some of us who've been around a little bit longer can honestly say this is not the same as even 15 years ago or whatever it was. So I don't want to have it seem like it hasn't been happening. I really think that it's already in progress, and you can't tell just from the outside of people exactly. So I'm congratulating the mayor and the department heads for the work that's already in progress. And yes, we need to continually move forward, but to say that we haven't started would be inaccurate. So thank you very much. Excellent presentation, and I just feel like We're already doing this.
That's a very fair statement. We are, but I think we can do more.
Of course.
And we work very, I mean, I'm very proud of the team that we've assembled here. We do all work together very well. And, but I think that the point is I think there's more to be done. And in particular, we need to be more inclusive. So Councilmember Clausen, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I want to respond to your call to action, Mayor. And I agree, this is a journey. I agree that we've already started this journey, but I think we have an awful lot more to do. And your challenge, if you will, or call to action is a resolution. I would welcome a resolution that this body can get behind to show that we're one of a team at the city of Port Orchard and the community of Port Orchard, and we're certainly willing to do our part. So I would welcome that.
Thank you. I appreciate that support. Councilmember Diener?
I just want to say that, yeah, we have begun, but often the first step in any journey is recognizing that you got to go somewhere. And I think that's what we've done over the last few years. I think the chief deserves recognition for the work that he's done as well.
Absolutely.
Do you currently have a DEI committee amongst your staff? You don't?
No.
Because that might be an interesting place to perhaps start. I think, as we start looking at resolutions and policies, I think we should, use that word inclusion as part of that, and to get other people having the conversation of what those types of policies or resolutions should look like, and that the actions that we take are meaningful, and we're not checking boxes, and we're marginalizing the concept of DEI. And so, I think it'd be great as we move down that road is to make sure that, we're reaching out this entire organization to get input, and as we start, looking at what those either policies or resolutions may look like.
And to that, we have had conversation, Beth and Debbie and I think in this particular, many times, whether it's the safety committee or the wellness committee, I have to voluntold people to participate. This body of work, I think we need folks to self-select, and I don't want to point to the chief, but he's doing fabulous things in this realm, in his department, in our community, and there's people that are passionate about this, and we need to tap that. So it may not be every department that's represented, because I'm not going to pick on anybody and call it, fictitiously call a department out or anything, but it's we need to create this committee. I agree, but I think it needs to be a group that self-selects and that wants to engage in this body of work, and hopefully I get a whole bunch of people that want to do that. But we'll see how it plays out.
Thank you.
Yeah, Debbie, go ahead.
I just wanted to let you know, we've already had employees volunteer to serve on this committee. The word is out, employees are excited, and so I echo those thoughts as well, that this is something we want people to be passionate about, but we already have had 2, I believe, employees.
I only know of 1, so 2 is great.
I believe it's 2 that
Well,
have.
you might be one of the 2.
Okay, 3.
All right, anything else for Beth? Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very
It
much.
was
Thank you.
excellent work.